Simone. Good morning, Gary.
Good
Hello,
morning,
Gary.
everybody.
And to everyone else, I see all the welcomes and good mornings. Good morning to all of you too. Thank you guys for joining us. Gary, I'll turn it over.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome to Clearing the Air, Understanding Oceanic Clearance Removal. Today, we have some wonderful panelists joining us. The first start is Robert Fleming, Manager of Area ACC Control Center Operations, Gander FIR. Along with us as well as Joe Sears, Director of Training with 30 West IP. And last but certainly not least, Clément Meersseman, VP of Strategic Partnerships at Nimbl. I'll be your moderator today. My name is Gary Webb, also with Nimbl Aviation. And let's jump into things. So today we're going to discuss a little bit about kind of, what changes go into effect. Excuse me. What changes go into effect, following the proper guidelines, and kind of ensuring everything on the operational and SMS side is up to par. So to kick things off, I'd like to pass it over to Robert to discuss a little bit about the current situation.
All right, thanks, Gary. And I would definitely like to thank everyone for taking the time to attend this session. It is really important to get as much information out there from a NavCan Gander FIR perspective. So hopefully this will provide some context, some clearing the air, as this session is called for you guys. And maybe we can make things better as we move forward. If you want to go to the next slide, Gary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little overview of OCR, why it came about, what we're currently doing. Try to provide some context around the RCL, which is a fairly known acronym for pilots out there, but the meaning for us in this manner is a little bit different than the normal RCL definition. Give you an idea of some of the safety events that we've been dealing with. And then lastly, a number of guidance material, reference material that we have out there that can hopefully make things better for you in the general aviation world as you're transitioning over the North Atlantic. Next slide, Gary. So why is OCR here? And how did it come about? So this is something that was actually brought through the ICAO forum structure that began at the PAG meeting, which is the Procedures Oversight Group. And it was brought forward by representatives from IATA, IFALPA, and IBEC. The intent was to streamline ATC operations over the North Atlantic with the rest of the world. In other words, why isn't that different from any other piece of airspace that you would transition through? So with that, we worked with those three groups and with the five ANSPs on the North Atlantic to develop uh, many system functionalities to allow for this implementation to happen. And of course, there's a number of procedures that had to get integrated into the ANSP world on how we're going to deal with this stuff. So we all sat down. There was a project team created, which IATA, IFALPA, and IBEC were a part of, and they developed the ConOps. So that ConOps is actually the foundation for the implementation of OCR. In the big scale of things, we had to dedicate a lot of resources to make this happen, as well did IATA and Alfalpa, of course. Uh, Previous to OCR, we used to have a dedicated position. It was called clearance delivery. That was where you would get the oceanic clearance when it was in place at that point in time. Whether you got it verbally or electronically through the OCL process using the ACAR 620 or 623 format, there was many different ways to make that happen. Essentially, by moving to the OCR world, what we began to transition to was utilizing the flight plan and the components of that flight plan to develop your clearance. But to do a last sanity check is where the RCL still came into play. So the RCL is kind of like your ability to say to Gander Oceanic controllers and the planners, hey, it's me. I'm on the way. Here's what I'd like to get when I get to the oceanic entry point. So within that, there's some confines that the planners and oceanic controllers would work with. I do want to say this. The current state of OCR is the initial phase one format. There are opportunities and a desire in the coming year or two to integrate or to advance the OCR world to, again, better streamline with the rest of the ATC airspaces that are out there. So that would mean the removal of the RCL component and relying completely on the flight plan and the flight crews for when they want to do something different from their current profile. So there's more to come on that in the coming years. We'll be developing a ConOps for that, and we'll also be doing a lot of stakeholder communication, consultation to make sure we get this one right when it does come about. Next slide, Gary. So the RCL. Flight crews are responsible to submit the RCL. The RCL needs to be submitted for Gander 90 to 60 minutes prior to the oceanic entry point. Contained within that RCL is your ETA for the oceanic entry point. So that's kind of the trigger in our system to say, yeah, I can accept that RCL based on that ETA. Within that RCL is your requested flight level. So that's your optimum flight level for the oceanic entry point. Your requested Mach. If it's different from what's in your flight plan, you would update your Mach then. But if it's the same as what's in your flight plan, you just put in the Mach that you're already maintaining, along with your maximum flight level. So that's the highest flight level that the flight is able to achieve by the oceanic entry point. It is very important that when you put in your max flight level, it is the one that you can maintain when you get to the oceanic entry point. We're seeing numerous occasions where the max flight level is entered. When we attempt to issue a clearance to that flight level, we soon find out that the flight cannot maintain that altitude. Given the timing of when we try to make that change, it could result in a less than desirable altitude being assigned. So it's very important to ensure that the elements that you're putting into that RCL are accurate for what that aircraft is able to achieve. So the optimum flight level and the maximum flight level is the altitude band that ATC will work within. We will try to get you a profile for an altitude at the oceanic entry point within that band. If we have to go outside that band, we are going to call up the flight, provide them options, and see what they want to do. At no point in time is the RCL flight levels considered or to be considered the flight level you're getting for the oceanic entry. We will advise you what your oceanic entry point is. If we do not provide you with clearance to change your altitude, you're already at your altitude for the oceanic entry. It's that simple in a lot of ways. Consider, like I said, the RCL is your way of saying, here I am. I'm on my way to the ocean. Here's what I'd like to get. Work some magic and try to give us what we're looking for. What I can tell you is 90% of flights, 93% of flights actually within the organized track structure get exactly what they're looking for. 97% of flights within the organized track structure are getting within 1,000 feet of what they're looking for. And then the other 3% is 2,000 foot difference. It is very rare to get a 2,000 foot difference, and it's normally in the summertime when we're at our peak traffic levels, of course. Outside the OTS, when you're in the random route airspace, it's a little bit of a different story. The traffic picture is not as streamlined as it is within the organized track structure. So where 80% of flights outside the OTS are getting exactly what they want, 90% of flights are getting within 1,000 feet of what they're looking for. And then 95% of flights are getting within 2,000 feet. The other 5%, they're flights that are not equipped to operate in that airspace. And unfortunately, we have to drop them below HLA. So that's essentially the Coles Note picture when you're looking at your flight and what you're going to get for the oceanic portion, we're very good at providing a service, and we treat all the traffic like a jigsaw puzzle. We try to provide the best optimum profiles we can, and if one aircraft is going to penalize, a half dozen aircrafts, well, we will look to move that one aircraft so the other half dozen can get exactly what it is that they're looking for. Once you submit that RCL, the response that we're going to give you is RCL received by Gander. That's all you're going to get. Once you get that RCLs received by Gander, it means we got your wish list. And now we're going to go off, we're going to try and develop a profile, and we're going to communicate that profile to either Gander Domestic, Moncton Domestic, or Montreal Domestic. And then they will be responsible to transition you to that profile prior to the ocean entry point. If you do not get your RCL altitude, we will store that request in our system. And when it becomes available, if it becomes available, traffic permitting, we will let you know. And we'll say, you know what, hire is available now. Your requested altitude is available now. What would you like to do? And if you come in saying, yeah, I want to request hire, I'd like to get to my RCL altitude, well, we'll issue that clearance at that point in time. Any level change that's required before the oceanic entry point, the latest it should happen is 15 minutes prior to the oceanic entry point. If we have to go beyond 15 minutes to the OEP, we're going to let you know that you're going to get a late climb. And we'll tell you why. It could be traffic, could be a departure coming off the island. There could be something that's impeding or workload. They're just not able to get to it at that point in time. But we'll give you a heads up that you're going to get a late climb just before the oceanic entry point. So you're not struggling or, doing an expedited climb to get to that altitude before getting onto the net. Your RCL level may not be the level that we can accommodate. There's so many factors when it comes to the traffic picture. Other traffic, we get, significant clumps of traffic that will hit oceanic entry points at the same time. If I get 3 aircraft hitting Porty within 1 minute of each other, all requesting 37,000 feet, there's no way I can make that happen. Something has to change. So just keep in mind, you're not the only flight up there. The other things that we have to contend with is runway altitudes, especially in the random route airspace. Not every altitude is an eastbound altitude. We have to protect airspace for the counterflow westbound flights that are coming. And airspace reservations. As you probably all know, there's a lot of different military areas on the European side that NETs are contending with. And they propose a lot of constraints for us at any given point in time that we have to factor in. The majority of them are NOTAM'd out, but not every NOTAM is accounted for either. So us as ANSPs, we have to account for anything and everything that will impact our ability to provide service delivery on the North Atlantic. As for the speed, every aircraft is expected to maintain an econ speed unless we assign you a hard mark due to traffic. And that would be the only time we will assign you a hard mark is if there's traffic either in front of you or behind you. If that traffic happens to move, we will let you know. And then we will provide you a resume normal speed clearance so you can get to your econ speed. But unless we tell you that you have to maintain a hard mark, which means we'll issue you a clearance with a hard mark setting, and you will get nothing else after that, it means that's the speed we need you to maintain. If you flight plan Mach 8.4 and we have to change it to Mach 8.2 because there could be slower traffic, 30, 40 miles ahead of you, we can still offer you a Mach 8.2 and a resume normal speed afterwards. It means you can speed up the Mach 8.4. It just means that we can't give you a Mach 8.4 resume normal speed because you'll chase down the guy in front of you. So these are the little nuances that we're seeing out there right now. They're the things that I'm really trying to educate flight crews on to ensure that they understand. And hopefully this will give a little bit more clarity as to what OCR is and how we're managing that environment today. Next slide, Gary. So safety events. This one's a big one for us. To put it in context, we've seen more safety events in the last 7 weeks in Gander domestic that we've had in the last 9 years. And when I say safety events, it's things that are out of the norm. It doesn't mean anything bad happened. It doesn't mean anything uh, impending with an aircraft to aircraft event happened. It just means that something out of the norm happened that we had to intervene and mitigate. So on the lateral side, to date, we've had 43 lateral errors. So that's 43 times Gander domestic had to intervene with an aircraft because the routing that was contained within the FMS was not the routing that was issued to that flight. So these are all route amendment clearances from the flight plan, and they were all done by UM79. So we uplinked the route clearance, and for whatever reason, the execution and loading of that route clearance was not done correctly. So 43 of those events have happened. How did we catch it? Through CPDLC UM 137. So the DM40 response back from the flight is conformance checked in our system to ensure what we are holding in our system as your profile matches what the FMS is holding as your actual flight plan route, or the route that the aircraft is actually going to be flying. So when we see a discrepancy, we're going to go up to the flight. We're going to ask them to confirm. And then when he comes back and says, yeah, we forgot to enter the Oceanic exit point or to change it 20 west, we can reissue it again. But typically we'll just do it via voice. And then once the aircraft reads that back, we'll give it another few minutes and we'll do another UM 137 to make sure it's done correctly. The other tools that we have is on the data link side is ADSC. We have waypoint, periodic, and event contracts. All those contracts are continuously providing data to the controllers. So we're interrogating every flight nonstop from the time you get in Moncton's airspace till the time you hit 30 West. And then Nats are going to take over and they're going to do the exact same thing on their side. And of course, ADSB. All the tools that ADSB are providing, we're getting 8-second updates from every flight that is ADSB equipped. And there's lateral and vertical conformance monitoring in that, like the SFL, CFL, which is selective flight level compared to the current flight level. These are the things we're using to prevent or intervene an event before it actually happens. On the vertical side, we've had 3 vertical deviations. These are flights that climb to their RCL altitude without a clearance. Unfortunately, they're a little bit harder to prevent. We do have the SFL, CFL function, but typically by time in domestic airspace where, you know, the alerts are coming to the controller and they're transitioning a number of flights, the level bust has already occurred. Normally it's 300 to 400 feet before we catch the actual vertical deviation, and that's when we'll stop the flight, ask them what their intents are, and get them back on the cleared altitude that they should be maintaining going into the oceanic entry point. I just want to be clear, the altitude that you submit in your RCL is not necessarily the altitude you're going to get. If there's a change to your altitude, ATC will give it to you either via data link or via voice, but you should not change anything in your profile unless you've received a clearance from your current ATC authority. Next slide, please. And I believe now it's good old Joe gets to jump in and do his magic.
Absolutely. Robert, thank you for sharing your insight and all this valuable experience. Joe, could you now tell us a little bit about how to follow and execute correct procedures going through this?
I will show you some examples, absolutely, using a generic set, as I like to say, of avionics to try to put a little flesh on the bone for us, just to kind of take the the information that Robert has shared with us from the words into pictures for you. So that's attempting what I'm going to attempt to do here. I'm going to preserve my webs or your screen space as well by turning off my video. And as we go through, as we start here, I like to always give everyone, and for those of you that attended our courses with us, of course, you know that we like to share with you all the resources. Mr. Fleming is the top resource for this conversation. So unfortunately, though, he can't be available to every one of us. 800 and what do we have? 830 of us on the screen right now. You can imagine trying to answer everybody individually. So I'm going to point you to what you have probably in your iPad already. Starting off with your JET materials. If you use your JET materials, go to the North America or the European Airway Manual, either one, because they both have the NatDoc 007 stuff in it, as you probably well know. And in this section, in the NAT HLA section, you see the North Atlantic request for clearance information specified right there. Next slide, please. So this information, there we go. Oh, there, yeah, one more source for that. I apologize. I was expecting a different slide. I do want to point you out to, as well as your operations manual. We always refer to your operations manual when we discuss, any aspect of international operations. And that is a big impetus from the FAA these days to ensure that you're aware of what is your approved, procedure that's in your ops manual. So you do need to pay attention. And if you have a well-written manual, you probably already have updates from your provider. In fact, with the Nimbl manual, you can see they have an entire Appendix D dedicated to this subject for you. Next slide, please. But of course, going back to the Jepson information, this is available to everybody. If you don't happen to have the Nimbl manual, you should have this. And of course, you can use the NatDoc bulletin itself. I'm sorry, the NatOps bulletin itself that addresses the RCL. You can scan, of course, the QR code right there to take you directly to it if you like. Next slide, please. So returning to our Jepson material in this information right here, as Mr. Fleming pointed out to you, the RCL is done either through voice or through data link. Typically, we refer to it via data link, and when we mention data link, we're specifically talking ACARS, as Mr. Fleming specified. ACARS, on the ARINC 623 standard, usually is what you guys are going to have installed in your airplane. But if you don't happen to have an operable ACARS, you can always use voice. Just relay your RCL through the local controller. And of course, the RCL has to include all the information that you're accustomed to when you were doing the oceanic clearance procedure. It's now the same for you functionally in the airplane, but it's a different process. In fact, I saw some questions asking what does RCL mean and that sort of thing. In the past, it was a request for clearance, but now it's as Mr. Fleming said, it's just a statement saying, hey, here I come. I'm going to be there in about 90 to 60 minutes, and this is what I would like to get altitude-wise, and this is what I'm planning for speed. Now, you can see we have the Gander information highlighted for you there, and it does specify 90 to 60 minutes, and there is a ball note. Pay attention to that. If you are departing from an airfield, say, St. John, Gander, or someplace like that, that is less than 45 minutes from the OEP, well, then you're going to submit your RCL 10 minutes prior to engine start. So it's similar to what you're accustomed to and what you've been doing in the past, only now you're not receiving a clearance per se. You've got the information as far as your route on the ground, and then you're just telling them in your RCL message what it is that you're planning to do speed-wise and what you're requesting level-wise. Next slide, please. So that means you're going to have to use, and again, as I stated at the beginning, this is I formulated a generic set of avionics here, but you have to obviously refer to your specific avionics you have installed in your aircraft. And of course, within that particular avionics set, you might have various software versions that you have to consider. So your screens might appear slightly differently. For example, in this Epic version, you can see it says Oceanic REQ. It might say Oceanic CLX, but the function is the same. So you're going to use the same function that you did use previously to send this message. So it's going to feel like you're still doing an oceanic clearance request, but you're not asking for an oceanic clearance. Next slide, please. So the information that we specify, or that I'm highlighting for you right here, the speed information is what you're advising ATC that you plan to maintain, and the language that you're going to find, and Mr. Fleming used the language as well, because it's let's be honest, the bulk of the traffic out here is probably airline traffic. I have no doubt that it is. They have econ function, while a lot of your business aviation airplanes do not. So I think these slides are advancing on themselves. So they're going a little fast for me, so that's okay. I'll try to catch up. So the speed is what you plan to maintain, and it is a resume normal speed kind of situation. All right, thank you, sir. Yeah, they're going a little too fast. So the flight level, I'm going to go back to that one as well. The flight level is exactly what Mr. Fleming said as well. What could you maintain? This is what we're sorry, the flight level is what you would like. The max flight level is what you could maintain at the highest point, of course, at the oceanic entry. That gives ATC the flexibility to try to change your level rather than changing your route. So it's important to include the max flight level, even if it is the same as your current flight level, the one that you've requested even. That way ATC has an understanding of what are your capabilities, because the last option they want to take is to change your route. That's where a lot of errors occur. So instead of changing your route, they'll rather just change your flight level for you. Okay, next slide, please. So back to the guidance in the Jepson material. After you've submitted the RCL explaining to ATC, hey, I'm planning to be here, as Mr. Fleming said, here I come, I'll be there 90 to 60 minutes. This is the speed I'm planning, or I intend to hold, and this is the altitude I would like to get. If everything goes well, so to speak, if you get your request, so to speak, again, trying to use older language, but again, it's not a request, say, except for the altitude, then of course you should receive this reply, the RCL received by. However, if you do see the RCL rejected message, well, then that means there was some issue, either technically with the RCL itself, or for some other reason, they just couldn't accept it. So you need to go to voice and contact ATC on voice and ask them to relay information with Oceanic about what it is that we need to do. Next slide, please. So this is, I like to say, is your goal. If you receive this message, RCL received by CZQX, then next slide, please, then you are done. There is nothing else left for you to do. You simply just follow any instructions from your local controller. And this is the beauty of it. It's now becoming like the rest of the world oceanically. If you enter into Oakland Oceanic from Oakland Domestic, whatever the domestic controller told you to do is what you're expected to do. So it's similar to that as far as entering Gander airspace now. If Gander Domestic, Moncton, or whomever you're entering through, Montreal, whoever, they're telling you what to do. Just listen to what their instructions are. The only time you need to really call and ask questions is if you got an RCL rejected, or if you didn't get a response to your RCL in 15 minutes, you need to call. Otherwise, don't jam up the frequencies with, uncertainty is the idea. We're trying to make sure that you're confident in your knowledge, and if you get RCL received, you're good. Now, any route change prior to the oceanic entry point will have to be issued to you either by voice or through CPDLC loadable route clearances. So what that means is you're either going to get a voice, call us up, we got to get a change for you, or it's going to be something like this on your screen, a CPDLC, what we refer to as a push to load. You like to call it that, but this is your push to load clearance. So keep in mind that this clearance to this particular waypoint is not a clearance directly to that waypoint. Go ahead and advance, please. This is not not a direct clearance to Resno. You have to follow the route to get to Resno. Next slide. So this message, UM74, I'm sorry, 74 would be the clear direct Resno, but of course you're not going to get a clearance across the net all the way from one entry point to the exit point. You're going to have your intermediate points as well. So this would be clear direct Resno, but this is not. This means you have to follow a route. So of course, under your standard SOPs, the FAA's guidance in 9170, the ICAO guidance and the PBN manual, you really want to check your route to make sure you understand, especially in RNP4, RNP10 type airspaces, or where procedural separation is applied. you certainly want to check it out. Make sure you're understanding where it is that you're expected to go. And of course, you have to do your conformance or your not conformance checks, but your standard, mag course and distance sequence verifications and those things. So you have to probably select standby in that case because it's probably going to take you more than 60 seconds to get this done and then reply to this message. Of course, you don't want to take a ding, so to speak, on your data link monitoring standards. So standby would probably be your friend. Now, I have no doubt that when you do open whatever it is in your software that you need to review the route, it's going to look like this because the CPDLC computer, when it receives the lat-long information from ATC, it does not know how to convert that into the 5-character waypoints that you need for your FMS system. So you can see it displays Resno. It'll display any 5-character waypoint name, but those 13-character lat longs that you receive, it doesn't know how to do that. So it's going to convert it to these placeholders. So you have to review these, whatever the function is in your particular avionics set. Maybe you select flight plan review. Go ahead, next slide. Or maybe you have to select each individual line select key and look at the waypoint. The idea is that you understand where it is you're going, confirm the waypoint, and then, of course, confirm mag course and distance, and so on and so on. So you've got to select whatever it is available in your software. Next slide, please. It might be something like this. You might be able to display all of these. And if you can, great. If not, you would have to individually investigate. So you might have to, depending on your software and your avionics, again, you might even have to activate the flight plan to even see it. You load, review, activate, whatever the case might be. But the idea is that you want to check the waypoints, and then more importantly, in addition to sequence reasonableness and mag course and distance, let's go back. You also want to make sure that you do any discontinuity checks. There will no doubt be a discontinuity if you get a route clearance uplink sent to you. So you've got to make sure you clear any discontinuities, or you might have a duplicated route. The first, as Mr. Fleming said earlier, we probably would change just the last couple of waypoints. So the first few would probably be the same. And you got to check to make sure that your FMS didn't double track that. It did not duplicate those first segments for you. So you do have to ensure that you check your legs page. In addition, if you have the capability, you could check your MFD map screen. Next slide, please. So these are slightly out of order. That's okay. We're going to work with it. The LL03 information doesn't tell you anything, by the way, as far as the quality of the waypoint. In this case, the waypoint could be a half degree. You won't know until you expand the waypoint and understand the full degrees and minutes of where your FMS is trying to take you based on the clearance you received. Next slide. So as I was saying, you have to check for discontinuities. The safest option would probably go through the full legs page, of course, because oftentimes you will see discontinuities there and it catch your attention. But if we go next slide, please. I'm trying to simulate an MFD screen, of course, using ForeFlight. And if you looked at your MFD map and you saw a spaghetti on the screen that looked like this, obviously that would catch your attention. But I have been told by clients, they've confirmed for me, that sometimes half the route overlays the original route, and you can't really see that it double tracked on the MFD. Only the last two waypoints that were changed would be affected on the MFD. So do be sure you're thorough in your search through the legs page as well as your MFD screen, whatever it is, to ensure you get rid of any of those discontinuities or double tracks. Next slide, please. There is something else you can do. We as you can see on the screen, referring to it as a sniff test, so to speak. Go to your progress pages. In your progress pages, as you can see on the left side versus the right side, we have prior to the route clearance uplink and then after the route clearance uplink. So you've accepted the clearance, you replied to ATC, we can do this, we're on our way. Let's make sure. Let's double check everything we can. As you can see, if you're numbers at your destination increased by an hour plus and your fuel dropped by more than half, you might be thinking to yourself, that just doesn't seem right. Why did this change so drastically? It's probably because you have a double track route in your system somewhere in your legs page. So make sure you do, clear that information if necessary. And next slide, please. And ultimately, as was indicated as well, Mr. Fleming said they're going to confirm your route as well. They're going to send you the confirm assigned route message when you enter when you become in their what we call the CDA. When you're in their CDA as the current data authority, they're going to confirm that you have actually loaded it as you were supposed to have loaded it. So they're going to still send you this confirm assigned route. Now, this is something that you've been receiving in the NAT for a while. This is something you're seeing propagate around other oceanic control areas around the planet too. A lot of ATC units are starting to issue this after 5 minutes or so after you enter their airspace, just as another way to double check, are you in fact going where you're supposed to be going? Next slide, please. Mr. Fleming, I'll ask, is there anything you would like to add to that or clarify for us?
Yeah, thank you, Joe. So just for awareness, a couple things, the reasons why you would get an RCL rejected. If you do not submit your RCL within that 90 to 60-minute window, you're going to get an RCL rejected. So when you get an RCL rejection, it doesn't mean you're going to get an oceanic clearance or you should request an oceanic clearance. It means you revert the voice to provide your RCL elements. We will then enter that into our system. If we cannot provide you what you requested via voice, it'll get retained in our system and we will let you know if it becomes available later. Another big reason why you will get an RCL rejection is because of flight planning errors. If the tail number does not match the tail number that we have in our system based on the RCL that's been submitted, the system don't know who the flight is. So it says, I don't know what to do with this message. And you will get an RCL rejected, which means you'll have to revert the voice to provide your RCL. So it's really important. This is something that we're seeing nightly. Whether it's through an airframe swap or, you might be recirculating an old flight plan, whatever the reasons are, you really need to make sure that the data contained within your flight plan is accurate for that airframe. If not, you won't be able to connect data link, all the good things that can happen for that flight, because all our separation standards are predicated, the reduced separation standards are predicated on data link. If we cannot connect to you data link, you're back to the 10-minute, 15-minute separation standard, which is very penalizing for not just your flight, but many other flights. Just to give you an idea, out of the 43 lateral deviations we had, 7 of those were from GA aircraft. And a lot of it has to do with the Lima coordinates. They're not sure what to do with it, and they're very confused. We do regularly get questions around the Lima coordinates that the crews don't know what to do with it, and we end up reverting the voice, giving a verbal route clearance in that manner. The one thing to be leery of is domestic are going to be issuing the UM79 route clearance. If it takes you an exorbitant amount of time to execute and load that clearance, you need to be aware of where you are when you hit execute and load. We have had instances where some crews, and not just GA, but actual commercial pilots as well, that it took them upwards of 25 minutes to load the route clearance. By that time, they were past the oceanic entry point, and when they loaded it, our UM79 route clearance starts at that oceanic entry point. So we've actually had flights try to do a 180 and turn back to the oceanic entry point. So what Joe was saying about, making sure you don't have duplicate or backtracking routes, that is very, very important because that is a significant safety issue for us because you could be turning around to oncoming eastbound traffic. And that was all I had. Thank you very much, Joe.
Thank you. Yeah, excellent input. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Joe, thank you for the additional clarification here on how to actually execute these procedures. And Robert, thank you for the added information here as well. So moving to kind of how to prepare for SMS operational documentation. Clément, could you give us your take on this?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely fantastic information from both you, Joe and Robert. And I think what we're if I want to leave everyone with sort of three themes to take away on this, it's ensuring that you have proper procedures in place, that you've been trained, because these things are evolving constantly. So there's a real need to stay aware of it. And then that in turn is going to just give you a better awareness and a sense of what you need to be doing in that area. So first of all, and I know Joe, you talked about it a little bit earlier, and you guys are obviously a big proponent of having all of this documented in a manual, but really that is the place where you want to record all your procedures and know what to do in there. Now, there's a purpose to this. It's going to ensure standardization across your operation. You want all your crews to be doing the same things and be aware of the same things. And then furthermore, that's going to really simplify a lot of things when things update because you're really going to be able to refer just to that one company manual. As far as structuring the manual, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about it, but it's really all about defining your roles and responsibilities and defining all these things that we talked about, your oceanic clearance removal procedures, your flight planning rules. Robert, you talked about the importance of flight planning. Uh, especially with CPDLC, we're seeing so many errors in flight planning codes and the way flight plans are prepared, which may seem minimal when you're on the ground and doing this stuff 2, 3 days before your flight. But as Robert, you mentioned, these have real consequences up in the air. So you really want to take the time in advance to review what your flight planning procedures are and ensure that the codes that you have listed on your flight plan actually correspond to your equipment and what you're trying to do. No better place to do that than to put all that in a manual, and all that will be nice and clear for everyone to know. The other thing I want to talk about a little bit is communication and error management. Things happen, right? And it's all about minimizing risk and alleviating as much as possible the potential for errors. But if it does happen, it is key to have proper communication and error management channels. And again, how does that run through? You'll want to outline that in your manual. Obviously, contingency procedures and weather and route amendments, because we've talked a lot about the proper procedures and correct and filing and whatnot, but you have to also consider that there will be weather and route amendments that do pop up, and you have to be ready for those. Finally, as far as the manual goes, you want to have those regular updates. There was an NatOps bulletin that came out in June, I think June 12th this past year. There's a new one that came out January 7th. That's pretty much a 6-month interval here. That's how quickly these things move. There's a lot of changes going on. Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, but the OCR procedure came live, I think, on December 3rd in Gander. So things are changing constantly, and you may end up saying, well, I've flown in the Atlantic, I flew 6 months ago. Okay, but that doesn't mean that the procedures that were there 6 months ago are there now. So you really have to stay on top of this. So your intermittent updates, reissuing the manual at least once a year, and then obviously tie in with your training provider. I think Joe really outlined very well how important it is to stay on top of training and know how to use the procedures in your manual and put them in practice in the air. Next slide, Gary. So one of the things also I wanted to talk about is the importance of your safety management system and all this. And then you're all going to be asking me, well, how is this tied? Well, it is very much tied because recording all these events and recording the flight and the data is really going to ensure that you're going to be properly aware of what's going on, and you're also going to be able to find holes in some of the procedures and things that you're going to do. So first of all, the importance of it is really around incidents prevention and learning. The more you do these risk assessments and reports, which I'll talk here in a minute, the more you have the opportunity to actually find out what are those deviations that you're doing, what are those near misses that you may have had, what are those discrepancies that you've been going through. And it really, again, facilitates continuous improvement. We're all about making our operations better and safer, and there's no way better to do that than with a safety management system. It's going to improve your operational efficiency. It'll help you better determine how to coordinate with air traffic control, and in addition to your flight crews in your operation. And then one of the things as well, I think that's important to underscore is that it will reduce delays because, again, you will have well-documented procedures and communication protocols. Situational awareness, we talked a little bit about it. Obviously, we don't want any of that to happen, but it also ensures that you're ready for any emergencies or contingencies that would occur during your flight in the NAT. The NAT, as we know, is one of the busiest airspaces in the world, and so there's a lot of things to take into account here: weather avoidance, traffic congestion. A slew of new procedures that are coming through. All that is potential risk, and you have to mitigate. And then finally, stakeholder confidence. You want your principal to be confident in the fact that you know what you're doing, and that's really a lot about what a safety management system does. Next slide, Gary. A few things we wanted to talk about is some considerations for your risk assessment. A lot of what safety management equates to is to be properly prepared in setting up your risk assessment. And there's a few things here that may pique your interest. Obviously, ensuring the proper functionality of your CPLC, ADS, VHF radios, and your redundancy. All that can be potential factors that you can list within your risk assessment. Those are checks. That's what a risk assessment's all about, is checking that you've gone through and verified that all this is working and that you're aware of it. Joe talked about that sniff test. Well, make sure that you assess your fuel properly and that you evaluate your fuel for turbulence and adverse weather. And these are things that can be done through your pre-planning phase. The operational factors, obviously, the accuracy of your flight plan. Again, is that something that you've done prior to actually flying? Look it over. Make sure your codes are correct. Make sure that you file the proper routings. Alternates, and obviously more at large regulatory compliance. Next slide, Gary. Obviously, environmental factors play a huge role in here, so you do want to always look at your en-route weather, your forecast, your turbulence, and then your fuel burn. Obviously, is something that may have an incidence on that. There's some specific oceanic hazards that you may want to look for as well. GPS outages. We're talking a lot about that these days, so do plan to always have a RAIM and fault detection and inclusion report included. The other thing as well that plays a lot is fatigue management. There's a lot of things going on in that airspace, and we're all very busy. So it is something to consider taking into account there. Next slide, Gary. Crew coordination is pivotal. So you always want to have these briefings, just like we're having here. We're kind of all briefing through this. So it's important to discuss this with everyone that's involved in the operation to make sure everyone's prepared. Enlist your other services, enlist your flight planning vendors, as well. They'll have some key insights for you. Emergency preparedness. Can't emphasize how important that is. We don't want to think about it, but you want to be ready for it. So diversion airports, you want to make sure those meet your safety requirements. Your distance and time for alternates is also super important. There's not a lot of time to think sometimes in these high density airspaces, so you really want to have that squared off. And then as we're dealing in remote areas here, you do want to consider your emergency gear on board, especially since I don't think it's too warm up in Gander these days, Robert, but so you definitely want to be prepared for that. And then finally, what is the whole point of your SMS and risk assessment? It's to actually end up using the data. It's not all about just doing the report and making sure you're underneath that threshold. You're collecting all this data, and then over, maybe every quarter or twice a year, you're going to look at and analyze, well, hey, it seems like we're often we're not checking our flight plans that often, or, there's certain procedures that we don't understand, or that we're often sending crews in that area that haven't flown within the past 6 months. So that will enable you to make effective changes in your procedures. And then obviously, again, review for effectiveness. It's a constant loop. You're constantly checking, constantly verifying that you're up to date and up to speed. Next slide, Gary. And then finally, another key point I think that's important, and we've talked about, Robert was talking about some of these incidences that have happened. When that does happen, okay, it's important to obviously take care of that situation when it does, but then post-flight, it's important to record it. A mistake is a deviation, because it wouldn't be a deviation if you hadn't made the mistake. Your procedures are in there. So if you're making mistakes, that means you're not adhering to the procedures in your manual. And yes, okay, it's a mistake, but it's valuable data. It means that we can learn from it and we can do something about it, not only just for yourself, but for everyone in the operation. So it is really important to document all this stuff. And again, it's going to enhance your situational awareness for future operational practices. Some of the key components you can think about in a deviation report are the details of the deviation. Did we not quite understand the UM79 message set or UM74? Were there any communication discrepancies? We didn't talk to anyone. We thought it was all CP to LC. We got an RCL reject and we continued on. And then finally, it's also important to understand, well, what did you do to resolve this? Because maybe some of those elements were fine, maybe others need some work on there. So again, it's a really important part of the process. And then you want to, again, just like I talked about in the risk assessment, you want to integrate that in your SMS so you analyze that over time to actually look at how we can then improve and talk to folks about training or additional clarifications on some of the things, some of the best practices and whatnot. And Robert, if I can tag you on this one, I know there's also some valuable insights from the CMA that can roll into this.
No, thank you very much, Clément. So the CMA, which is the Central Monitoring Agency, they're an ICAO regulated body. So essentially, they meet twice a year, every 6 months, and they review events, safety events, deviations that happen in the 6 months prior. So it's broken up January to June and then July to December. So there's actually a CMA meeting scheduled for March where they're going to look at all the events that happened between July 24 and December 24. Whenever a deviation or a safety event happens, like a lateral deviation that we prevented or intervened, to really complement what Clément is saying, it is very important for you to document what happened at that point in time because we're going to be following up with you. For the 7 events that we've had with the GA pilots already, we've already reached out to those pilots to get their side of the story as to why this actually occurred. So all these events get rolled up for the entire North Atlantic. So that's New York, Santa Maria, Reykjavik, Prestwick, and Gander. We get together. It's a full week. Depending, it could be anywhere from 200 to 400 events. Some are minor in nature, some are a little bit riskier in nature. The key thing to remember is all these events, it's about establishing trends. It's about making things better. Do we need to put more guidance material out there? Is there more education that needs to happen? But really, the bigger thing about it is they all contribute towards the target level of safety for North Atlantic. And when that TLS gets to a number that's too high, it impacts the separation standards that we have. So all the good, beautiful reduced separation standards that are out there today, like the 14, 17, 19 nautical miles ADS-B standards we have, they could all disappear if we're not able to maintain that TLS target. So this is why the whole SMS follow-up is very critical to make sure that we're able to maintain the safety record that it needs to be. And that promotes our ability to continue with these reduced separation standards and will enhance us, in the future if we want to even reduce those even further, depending on technologies that come out, like VHF satellite, for example. So these are the things to keep in mind. The CMA is a very well-functioning group, and they do significant deep dives in these events because they want to understand what happened. And it's important to get the crew side of the story because that gives us the full picture. So if there's one thing I can ask you to take away from this, if we question you on something and you have to correct it, make sure to document it. So when we come knocking on your door, you remember exactly what happened. You're able to give us an accurate picture.
No, absolutely, absolutely, and really, what you're describing, Robert, in that CMA is really what sort of at obviously a much smaller level operators should do with their safety management system is collect all these reports, deep dive in them, and then provide corrective action. I did want to also mention that there is a report I believe that's filed, I believe it's yearly from the CMA that outlines all of these. So I think it's worth looking at as well, right?
Yeah, every 6 months, if you go on the
Every
ICAO
6 months.
Paris website, you can see the safety reports, and it'll give you the trends. It's broken down into causes. There's a lot of really good information in there.
Yeah, absolutely. Encourage everyone to have a look at that. All right, Gary, I'll leave it off to you with that.
Fantastic. Clément, thank you for your take on best practices of SMS and keeping your operational documentation up to date. We'd like to move to the Q&A portion. We've had a lot of great questions come through. So I'm going to start with the first one here from Kasuk Ferguson. So one of our attendees is new to oceanic crossings and has done a few Atlantic crossings between the US East Coast and the UK. Their first crossing was before December 4th of last year, and they're unsure about any procedural changes since then. They'd like to clarify if an eastbound RCL through Gander is still required, whether it's now just a confirmation of the ground clearance, and what the purpose and necessity are.
I guess that one's for me. So yes, the eastbound RCL is still required. And it's more for the flight crews than it is for ATC. So it's kind of like your wish list for what you want for the oceanic crossing. And it gives us a picture of what we can work within to provide you what it is that you're looking for. So like I was saying earlier, your OAP optimum altitude and your max altitude is the band that will work within. If we can't make an altitude work within that band, then we're going to reach out to you and we're going to provide you some options. It could be a route option that'll give you the altitude that you're looking for, or it might be an altitude a couple thousand feet less. Who knows? But essentially, without the RCL, all we have left is your flight plan. And from an ATC perspective, the only thing really accurate in the flight plan right now is the route because it's filed so far in advance, and so many things can change when it comes to the weight of the aircraft and the loading of the aircraft that your filed altitude might be the altitude that you need at all. So if you're looking to get a good optimum profile for your net crossing, submit the RCL. And that's all we need from you. After that, we'll work our magic. We'll tell you what we can give you when we are able to provide it to you. And if we can't change anything, you're not going to get a clearance. You just stay where you are and you motor on. And if that altitude comes up later on, we'll let you know, and we'll provide you an option to climb to it if you so desire.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robert. It seems like I might have a few more geared toward you, but anyone else, feel free to step in if you'd like. From Paul Jennings, why can't the request times for all RCL be synchronized across Gander, Shanwick, Iceland, etc.? Seems like everyone wants different 60 to 98-minute prior, no more than 45-minute prior, 35-minute, 30-minute prior. And if you miss the request window, then you have to revert to voice, which adds workload and induces errors. It seems like an easy thing to clean up.
It's easier than you. It's a lot harder than you think. We all have different constraints, and that's a good way to put it. If you look at a westbound flights coming out of Heathrow, Gatwick, even closer, Dublin, the fly time between getting from that departure airport to the oceanic entry point is a lot less. So they don't have as much time to work with as we do. The reason why we've requested 90 to 60 minutes is because it gives us time to put the puzzle together. And it allows us to work flights around to ensure that we're providing the greater good to the mass majority of flights that are coming. So we could easily go on a first come, first served basis, but the outcome of that could be a lot dire than what it is today. So if you want to continue to get the great service that we're getting, we really would like to get your RCL so we can try to get you what you're looking for the crossing to make sure that first and foremost, we're not putting your flight at risk, but it gives us an accurate picture of what we're going to be dealing with from sectorization and that, an operational readiness point of view.
Very nice. Thank you. And maybe we'll try for a couple more questions from Matthew Birch. Is there an international ops manual insert that has been created with new procedures? Something that we could add to our IOM?
I'll take that, Matt. Yes, so there is obviously if you're doing your international ops manual within in-house, that'll be something that you'll want to look for resources on. The NatOps bulletin, obviously, But if you are using a provider, I know at Nimbl we provide weekly updates, and obviously that'll be included in your reissue. So do reach out if you are one of our clients, and we'll certainly help you with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you. Well, it seems like we are hitting our time limit here. We will take a note of all these questions and try to reach out to all the audience to answer everything that we haven't been able to cover here. I'd like to move forward. There is a handout that is in the webinar chat. I'm going to add one more time just to make sure everyone has the opportunity to download that. And if you have any questions or any issues downloading, you will see on the next slide here that you are able to scan some QR codes that I will leave up here. And at this time, I'd like to go ahead and first thank the panelists for this wonderful presentation and your time. I know there's been a lot of hard work into putting into this, a very hot topic. And I'd like to thank the audience for all their great participation today and all showing up. And last but not least, here are all the experts' contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any additional questions, need any information on the guides, handouts, anything we could send. And I would like to thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Questions that are remaining, you guys can send those directly if you like.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for joining.
Take care.